For most of modern economic history, headcount has been an important metric, not because leaders were obsessed with hiring, but because for a very long time, it reliably told the truth about how growth worked. That logic traces back to Adam Smith, often described as the founder of modern economics. In The Wealth of Nations, Smith argued that economic output came from the application of human labor, amplified by specialization and division of work. Capital mattered, tools mattered, but without labor, nothing moved. Production was deeply connected to people. That idea didn't remain just theory. The industrial era turned it into lived reality. Factories scaled by adding more heads. Output increased through longer shifts, larger workforces, and denser coordination. Productivity improvements made each worker more efficient, but total production still depended on how many people showed up. Entire cities formed around employment density. Headcount was not a managerial construct, it was capacity. By the mid-20th century, this relationship became embedded in formal economic theory. Models like the solo growth model mathematically linked growth to labor, capital, and technology. Labor wasn't optional, it was the core input. If an economy wanted to grow, it needed more workers, better workers, ideally both. Over time, this produced a simple, powerful story that shaped how governments, companies, and individuals understood progress. What has traditionally driven a growing economy is a story that goes like this. Demand rises. People want more goods, more services, more convenience. To meet that demand, companies increase production. To increase production, they hire more workers. Those workers earn wages. With higher incomes, they consume more, which creates more demand. This reinforcing loop is capitalism. With that, governments used employment as a primary signal of economic health. Companies treated hiring as proof of momentum and trajectory. Careers, then, were built on the assumption that growing systems needed more people. Even as economies shifted from factories to offices, the story held strong. Knowledge work still required human time, analysis, coordination, judgment, decision-making. Software made people faster, but it didn't remove them. Labor remained the constraint. That's why what's happening now feels so unsettling, because when growth starts to occur without labor, it doesn't just challenge a theory. It breaks a deeply rooted belief system we've relied on for generations. Here are 4 signals from this week that suggest we are about to witness that belief system deteriorate. But before we jump into the signals, let me take a minute to introduce myself if you are new here. My name is Chris Schmelzer, and I serve leaders who recognize the need and understand that the old models of leading and working are no longer keeping up with the pace of change. Every week, I track the subtle signals that a massive reset is coming for what we refer to as white-collar work, and with it, so too it will change the way we need to lead. Here are 4 stories from this week that point to this massive shift. The first story from this week. This week at Davos, World Economic Forum, leaders stopped whispering. What made Davos different this year wasn't the presence of AI. It was who said what and how plainly they said it. One of the clearest statements came from Dario Amodei, whose company builds some of the most advanced large language models in use today. Amodei warned that AI is moving beyond task assistance and into role replacement, stating that a significant share of white-collar jobs, potentially up to half, could be materially disrupted. His comments weren't framed as speculation, but as a reflection of what current systems are already capable of doing. From the institutional side, Kristalina Georgieva, who oversees global financial stability at the International Monetary Fund, focused less on productivity and more on readiness. She described AI's impact on labor markets as a tsunami, warning that while growth may accelerate, most governments and organizations are not prepared for how quickly labor demand could shift. Then came the capital markets perspective. Larry Fink, head of the world's largest asset manager, drew a direct historical parallel. AI, he said, may do to white-collar work what globalization once did to manufacturing, compressing entire categories of jobs faster than institutions can adapt. His warning was explicit. If AI-driven efficiency primarily benefits shareholders while employment constricts, trust in economic systems will continue to erode. Taken together, these weren't fringe voices predicting disruption. They were system stewards of technology, policy, and capital, acknowledging the same shift from different angles. Economic growth is increasingly decoupling from human labor. The signal. The idea that growth and job creation may no longer move together is becoming normalized among global decision makers. That alone marks a break from decades of institutional thinking. This week's second story. The White House is preparing for systematic impact. While Davos leaders debated implications, the White House moved to prepare for impact. This week, the administration advanced a new federal AI strategy aimed at asserting national authority over AI governance, in an effort to avoid a fragmented, state-by-state patchwork. The strategy is less about innovation policy and more about risk management. When the federal government centralizes control over a technology, it's usually because it expects system-level consequences of the legal, economic, and social type. Similar centralized control has evolved over electricity, aviation, nuclear energy, and the internet. Two things specifically stand out. First, AI is being treated as economic infrastructure, not a tool. The strategy anticipates that AI will reshape decision-making, accountability, and labor demand faster than existing institutions can adapt. Second, the administration is preparing for conflict, not consensus, including enforcement and legal challenges to state-level AI laws that interfere with national commerce. This sits at the fault line between national coordination and state-level autonomy. Our national government is preparing for a world where AI adoption alters labor markets at scale and where the consequences arrive before norms are ready. The signal. That shift alone suggests the traditional link between growth and employment is under pressure. Our third story this week. What McKinsey labels headcount. If Davos articulated the macro risk, McKinsey showed what it looks like in practice. In a recent interview, Bob Sternfels, who runs McKinsey & Company as the global managing partner, described McKinsey's workforce this way. We're about 60,000 people today, roughly 40,000 humans and 20,000 AI agents. That single sentence marks a quiet but profound shift. Just 18 months ago, McKinsey had roughly 3,000 agents. Sternfels noted that he originally believed it would take until 2030 to reach the same amount of humans and agents. Now, he expects that point to arrive within the next 18 months, with every employee supported by one or more AI agents. This matters because McKinsey isn't experimenting at the margins. It is one of the world's primary engines of white-collar work: strategy, analysis, coordination, decision-making. Sternfels went further, explaining that once AI can execute work across functions, the organization itself has to change. Traditional hierarchies, approval chains, and handoffs were designed for human coordination. When that coordination is no longer required by default, traditional organizational structures become friction. What's notable is not the technology itself, it's the framing. The signal. McKinsey is no longer describing agents as tools, they are describing them as workforce capacity. Our final story from this week, growth without labor. One of the clearest explanations of growth without labor this week came from the podcast Exploring Prosperity, hosted by Bob Dewey, in conversation with Jordi Visser, a veteran global macro investor who spent decades analyzing labor, productivity, and capital flows for institutional portfolios. Visser pointed to a historic anomaly. 2024 delivered economic growth without labor growth, a pattern rarely seen in modern economic history. Not because demand collapsed, but because production no longer requires proportional human input. AI, he argued, changes the equation entirely. Unlike past automation, which replaced physical effort, AI competes directly with cognitive labor, the work people went to college for, and this in itself is a topic for another time. We are now hiring digital employees, Visser said. They work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that doesn't reverse. Visser also described how he personally works, running the same questions across multiple large language models, comparing outputs, and consolidating perspectives. AI isn't about getting answers, he said. It's about increasing the probability that you're making a better decision. The signal. When output can rise without hiring, labor stops being the constraint, and headcount stops being a reliable indicator of economic health. Step back and look at what surfaced this week. Global leaders at Davos openly acknowledged that AI is compressing white-collar work faster than institutions can adapt. The federal government is preparing for labor-level disruption, not incremental efficiency. One of the world's most influential professional services firms now counts a third of its workforce as non-human, and macro data is showing economic growth without corresponding labor growth. If growth no longer requires hiring, if capacity no longer maps cleanly to headcount, if organizations can scale output without scaling people, then what exactly is headcount measuring now? If you're a leader reading this and feeling unsettled, tense, or vaguely off balance, that's not a personal shortcoming. It's a rational response to signals that no longer cohere. When the metrics you were trained to trust stop lining up. When growth doesn't mean hiring, when stability doesn't look like headcount, when progress doesn't follow familiar paths, your system feels it before your intellect can explain it. What registers as anxiety, urgency, or pressure is often your nervous system responding to a world where the old patterns no longer reliably predict outcomes. And what happens when the signals we've relied on for decades stop telling us the truth? That's where the disorientation begins. For most of our working lives, we've been trained to interpret the world through stable assumptions. More jobs means a healthy economy. Hiring means progress. Employment means security. Those assumptions shaped careers, strategies, identities. They helped people make sense of risk and reward. What's unsettling about this moment isn't just that those assumptions are being challenged. It's that many of them are still being applied while the environment that made them reliable has changed. This mismatch is what creates anxiety, confusion, and reactive behavior. Leaders push for clarity that doesn't yet exist. Individuals try to optimize against rules that are quietly expiring. Organizations double down on structures designed for a world where coordination required people at every step. The result isn't just strategic friction, it's nervous system overload. And this is where the real work begins. Navigating this shift isn't primarily a technical problem, it's a regulation problem. When familiar signals fail, human systems, individual and collective, move into threat response. Decision-making narrows. Yearning for control tightens. And at the same time, our capacity to be open and learn, which we need the most, goes offline. This is what that feels like. Picture a Monday morning leadership meeting. The unregulated leader opens with urgency. Headcount is flat, expectations are rising, we need a plan. The room narrows. People reach for familiar tools. Hiring freezes, reorganizations, more data. Anything that restores a sense of control. The meeting ends with action items, but also tension. People leave feeling pressured and unclear. The regulated leader opens differently. Some of the signals we've relied on, headcount, productivity, growth, aren't lining up the way they used to. Before we rush to decisions, let's question the assumptions behind them. That one move changes the room. It slows the system just enough for better thinking. Instead of forcing certainty, the leader creates space to notice what's actually changing. This is the leadership this moment demands. Not calm for its own sake, but enough regulation to stop defaulting to outdated models. Enough presence to let perception update before action. In this moment, that may be the most practical leadership skill there is. The core of the change mindset community is about developing the leadership capacity needed to guide people through a transition period, when roles, structures, and the meaning of work are being renegotiated. The focus is on building internal skills that matter before new models are clear. Skills like staying regulated when certainty isn't available, recognizing when outdated assumptions are driving decisions, and creating enough safety for teams to think rather than react. This isn't about managing decline, it's about leading transformation while the system is still in motion. Leaders who can do this don't remove uncertainty, but they prevent it from cascading into fear, fragmentation, and premature action. They become stabilizing forces when structure alone no longer provides stability. That capacity, more than any specific strategy, is what this moment demands. Because the question ahead isn't just what comes next. It's who you're becoming as the old maps fail. The leaders who navigate this won't be the ones with the best predictions. They'll be the ones who built the capacity to lead without certainty and to help their people do the same. If this resonates, join us. www.changemindset.co. That's the invitation behind the Change Mindset community. A place for people who feel the tension and want to do something with it. Who want to lead differently, not just with sharper tools, but with deeper understanding. Join us as we explore what it means to lead, live, and work in an era of accelerating transformation. Check out the link in the description to learn more.